Welcome to Inspired Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower men in a positive way, designed to educate, empower, and inspire even the busiest individual on the go over that first cup of coffee. Please join me in welcoming Gunter, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
And welcome everybody to Inspire Change. Let's have another episode. Now, in the last few episodes, I've been talking about mental health and mental well-being, which I've differentiated from psychological disorders or psychological distress like anxiety, depression, suicidality, and so on. There's a whole host. We have a whole book called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM-5, that psychologists use to diagnose people. But that's not what I want to talk about fundamentally in these last few podcasts and the next few that are upcoming. I really want to help people understand the concept, the idea of mental health, mental well-being, and have a framework to understand that whole concept from, so we don't get confused, and so we can specifically focus on the construction of myself within my environment that's going to make me feel well and therefore have an enjoyment of life as opposed to a sense of suffering. Although some philosophers think that that's possibly a necessity for life itself. Won't get into that right now. That might be the topic for another podcast at another time. So in the last episode, I spoke about the notion of mindfulness. And again, I'm going to park that for a little bit because before I get into that some more, I want to actually talk a little bit about some of the cornerstones. And I know some of this is repetitious, and I'm going to be keeping that repetition going because I really want to bring that message home to everybody who's listening. And repetition is a fundamental concept in learning, and it's also fundamental in our behavior. So, if I'm going to practice meditation, I just don't do it once. I do it repetitively. Same with exercise. If I want to get strong physically, one trip to the gym a month may not cut it, okay? And I think most people would agree with that. So, mental well-being. So, it's about the enjoyment of life. It's also about the capacity to be able to build and maintain relationships with others. Now, again, I'm going to come back. I want to focus this whole section and most of the podcasts on men, but I'm welcoming women to think about these issues as well. So I've been talking about mental health, mental well-being, resting on three pillars: self-awareness, flexibility, and resilience. Okay, I've spoken about some of the issues that already help to do that. For example, I focused a bit on sleep. And our culture currently suffers from a sleep debt that's at a chronic level. If this was a virus like we've got with COVID-19, we'd be talking about an epidemic, possibly a pandemic of sleep debt. Now, some of the things involved in my self-awareness is body awareness, it's awareness of my thinking, it's awareness of my feelings, and it's an awareness of my behavior. Now, then we talk about flexibility in the same context: thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And being flexible in those three areas so that I can adapt adequately to the changes in my environment and the changes within myself. And ultimately, that's what we're looking for. We're looking at being resilient. Now, let me come back to the whole thing about mindfulness, because actually mindfulness is embedded within those structures. Self-awareness is a form of mindfulness. Now, someone the other day asked me about, can I be mindful when I'm angry and how do I stay calm? Well, I thought that was a really interesting question. And so, like all questions that I'm asked, I thought about it and I didn't immediately give an answer. I said, let me think about this. And essentially, the position that I arrived at was that calm doesn't mean being devoid of emotions, whether they're positive or negative emotions. And we're not devoid of strong emotions or, small emotions either. The calm is, in fact, a state of being within oneself so that I'm less reactive. So I come back to one of the things that I've spoken about in previous podcasts, which is the difference between being reactive, and usually when I'm reactive, I'm consumed by my thoughts and feelings that then dictates my actions, usually not in a positive way. Whereas responsive means me being able to experience what it is that I'm experiencing, step back, reflect on it. In other words, think about it, make appropriate choices about how I want to deal with either myself, the other person, or the situation, and do so in a thoughtful way. So that's a very important aspect. And so when I talk about calm, it doesn't mean that I'm completely emotionally detached and devoid of said feelings. It means basically that I can stay grounded, that I've got my equilibrium, but not to the point where I'm rigid. It's about being that psychological ninja in a way. So that's one aspect. The other aspect that I want to talk about with regard to mindfulness is our mindfulness within the context of a relationship. And this is where it gets a little bit more difficult because, the question arises about what actually makes a good, healthy relationship. Now, I think that we need to examine both sides of the coin. We need to look at, what are relationships doing there fundamentally? What are we as individuals doing within those relationships? Now, a big thing that I was educated and trained in psychology was the whole idea of attachment and attachment theory, and it was especially directed towards children. What do I do as a parent with my children? And attachment for children is obviously really, really important. But how do we use that within the context of adult relationships? So after some thinking through, again, I decided that there were essentially 6 levels of relationship. And I'm going to go from the bottom up. So I'm going to go from worst to best, okay? So one of the things that I see very, very often in my practice with couples is that one or both people being essentially absent, if not physically, but emotionally absent within the relationship. And that obviously brings some real challenges to that relationship. How do you really relate and communicate, feel intimate with someone that you're actually not emotionally connecting with? What happens in a relationship like that? So it becomes a real challenge. Now, my experience with a lot of men especially is that often we're not aware that we're actually emotionally absent in the relationship. One of the things that happens is that because we're away from our relationship often and from home, we move along in a sort of automatic way. We go out, we go to our job, we do the stuff that's necessary at the job, then we come home, we're usually tired, then we're trying to deal with the demands of the children, the demands of our partner, and it gets tricky. And one of the things that sometimes brings with it is the next level, and that is that some of us become ambivalent in the relationship. Now, that doesn't mean we necessarily want to immediately leave the relationship. It just means that I'm not sure what's happening in this relationship. What's going on for me, my partner, my kids, the whole context of it. Now, one of the issues with ambivalence is that it brings with it a sense of tension. And a lot of men especially are aware of the tension, but they don't know what to do with it. And again, let me bring in that concept of mindfulness. If I exercise mindfulness, then I'm going to become clearer about whether I'm absent or ambivalent in the relationship. So the next level that often happens is that tension translates into feeling anxious. And then that anxiety is actually often useful. Now, I said I'm going from worst to best. So at this point in time, we're sort of operating in what I might describe as the suboptimal level, although don't think it's good or bad in a binary way, because quite often in that space we can get some insights into what I or the relationship may need. Okay, so that anxiousness can mean that I'm getting in touch with being emotionally vulnerable, which is useful in communication, especially if I learn to express that with my partner. Okay, so the focus, in a sense, below the line is about being unaware, then experiencing tension, and then possibly starting to take some action. So the quality of the relationship is that I'm going from being absent to being ambivalent to being anxious. And if I take that in a constructive way, if I put it into a constructive process, then I can move what I call above the line, which now I can begin to engage with my partner. And they may be some very difficult conversations that need to take place at that point. Engaging doesn't mean, oh, babe, I've just figured all this stuff out, and I know that I need to be here with you, I need to be engaged with you, and then expect that she's just going to be on board. That's not necessarily going to happen. She might have completely different ideas about what needs to be happening in the relationship, okay? But one of the things that when we get engaged and we feel that sense of connection and attachment, that feeling of love begins to grow. It begins to be fed by all the work that we're doing within the relationship. Now, at this stage, we're still going to have some bumps in the road because, to get to this point's taken quite a bit of work. To take it even further means that I'm going to need some really well-honed skills to get the relationship into a very dynamic place. And one of those is that I need to learn cooperation. I need to begin to let go of trying to dominate or control my partner, or at least call her on it when she's trying to do it to me, because that also happens a lot in relationship. That idea of dominating and controlling the other person is completely out of place. So one of the things that I need to do in learning to cooperate is to bring out, a better level of communication. And part of that communication is then to express the next level that goes from attachment up, and that is to be aspirational about myself and the relationship that I want to see happen. In other words, I need a vision for what I want this relationship to look like. And in order to really hear my partner, to be cooperative, to communicate well, I need to be very respectful of her or him so that we can really work together some more. So at that point, I'm going from aspirational And I'm going to start to look at how I can inspire my partner more. Now, sometimes it actually needs to start with me. I need to inspire me to be better in that relationship than I am. And sometimes I don't need to do anything to inspire my partner. I just need to be inspirational in myself. And through that process, really get into a point of being aligned with one another. Now, you might go, well, that's all very nice, but what's the payoff? What's in it for me? And the reality is that quite a lot, actually. In 1938, the Harvard study of adult development began following two groups of young men. And we've transformed that into a 75-year process to try and understand of what keeps men happy and healthy. And I think I might have already spoken about that in one of the other podcasts. But the fact of the matter is that we need healthy relationships in our lives to live longer. Okay, so it's very, very important. So the capacity to be close, to have close relationships, is important to the point where it actually predicts not only that you would stay happier, but that you stay physically healthier. So when you start to wonder, what the payoff is in being in a good relationship and what's all this work going to lead to, is that on the bottom line, you're going to live longer. And if you're not interested in that, take a step back, because there's something else missing. Because if you're really enjoying your life, you want to keep going. And in that context, you will make appropriate decisions about, how you live, about the food you take in, about, limiting alcohol, about not smoking, just really creating a healthy lifestyle together. So remember, guys, if you want to live longer, you want to work on a well-aligned, cooperative, respectful, and loving relationship. And then that will pull it together. Now, it's not just going to drop into your lap. It's going to take some work. And I'm going to pick up on a little bit more of that stuff in the next podcast. So until then, let me challenge you again. Start putting these things into practice, and you will become more resilient. And when I talk about resilience, it's the capacity to bounce back from adversity, to deal effectively with stress, trauma, and sadness. It's life's journey, because it doesn't come in one flavour, it comes in many. And so the idea that we should just always be happy, as you know from previous podcasts that I've made, it's a nonsense. Happiness can actually be a problem in the sense that if we keep trying to pursue just that, chances are we're going to be unhappy. But there's so much more to it. All right, until next time, look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change with Gunter. Gunter Swoboda does individual and group coaching for men looking to grow. For more information on this and the global Making Good Men Great movement, check out goodmengreat.com to get into contact. If you have a topic for the show or would like to be a guest on the air, please email producers at miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda, Miranda, at noirtainment, noirtainment.com. Thank you, and always keep inspiring change.